Hello, welcome back to Diagonal Move. My name is Neil, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different to what I normally do. And I'm going to do it with a game I've looked at before. That game is Winter Thunder, which is upside down. There we go, Winter Thunder. And a few weeks back, I did a video looking at how to play an overview using these print and play components. The game is designed by Brian Train and published by Tiny Battle Publishing. I've been playing print and play games for quite a while now, perfectly happy with the games that I create. And so when I received this in the post, all the way from America, generously given to me by Tiny Battle Publishing, I was quite surprised, as you might think. And also, I thought it'd be really neat to do this is the retail, this is the print and play comparison version video for the games, just to see which version of the game you're interested in. Let's say you really want the game, but you don't know whether to get the retail or make your own. Let's just have a look and see what the differences are. See how I do the print and play. See what comes in the bag. See which way you feel about going with the game itself. Whichever way you choose, it's a really good game and heartily recommend it. But let's just take a look at the differences. Here we are then, Winter Thunder, retail versus print and play. Hopefully you can tell just by looking at it which is the retail version and which is the print and play version. But just to be 100% sure, this is clearly the retail version. First difference, I suppose, between the two is how the files arrive, or how the games arrive. Perhaps unsurprisingly, in the retail version, it comes in a bag with, properly printed and mounted counters, and some of them are coming apart, have fallen off the sprue already. And everything you need for the game, with the exception of a dice or two, is here inside the bag. When you buy things print and play, you do have to assemble things yourself. And the way that works is you have everything. I put it all in the folder here, but you do have to, obviously you have to print off the rule book, and you do need to print off the maps and what have you, and assemble all the counters yourself, which is obviously takes a little bit of time and effort. And that is probably the biggest difference, I think personally, in the game, is that you do have to put quite a bit more effort into the print and play than you do the retail version before you can start playing the game. Let's just take a quick look at the rule books to start with. Obviously the files, when you get them print and play, they do come through the internet as a selection of combination of PDF files and picture files and so on and so forth that you can print off at home or take to the printer shop. The retail version obviously is this nicely produced, nice front and back cover rule book with obviously properly printed on decent paper and the rest. The version printed off at home, you do get the front cover and you do get everything else, but obviously I haven't printed all those extra bits off purely because of the ink and so on required to do that. The other thing, of course, to notice, and this is a real big thing if you're not printing off files in America, is the size difference. So here we have the UK A4, and this is US letter paper, I think it's called. But anyway, the A4 here in England is taller and slightly narrower than what comes retail, and that's true of the print and play files as well. They are in the American format, so you do need to resize things slightly. Not a massive job, you just change the printer paper selection on your printer function. But it is something to bear in mind because things do tend to come out slightly smaller than in the real game. Very slightly smaller, as you can hopefully see just from those 2 pictures there. Okay, but otherwise everything is more or less the same. And as with a lot of this, it does depend on whether you choose to use high quality paper or not, and whether you print at home or whether you take it to a local printer's shop. The most important thing for me though, when I was working out whether to do print and play or retail, and an initial driving force behind that for me, if I'm honest, was the cost. There is a cost implication to war games in England, and they do tend to be quite a bit more expensive than their Eurogame counterparts. But one of the biggest things for me was the map, and this is the retail map here. And again, it is quite big, and the equivalent print and play, you do have a few different sections that you can print off for ease of home printing. However, it is, and I'm not sure if you can see, but it is that little bit smaller print and play, at least in England, versus what's retail. And I've not really noticed it in terms of playing myself. I'm quite happy with it, but I could imagine if you have some difficulty picking up the counters and so on for physical reasons or what have you, you may find it slightly easier with the bigger hexes and the bigger writing and so on. Now, you don't have to assemble print and play in these 4 parts. The option is there. What you can do, you can get the map printed off at a print shop, which is what I've done here with Space Vermin from Beyond. This is a smaller map. This is our English A3, but you can get them printed off, and you can have the glossier paper and so on. But it is a cost factor to consider. I have started to get my maps and counters printed at the print shop rather than at home, partly due to the ink and partly because the printers they have are just better than what I can get at home. But it is that extra implication of cost is the main reason you're considering print and play. But the print and play is absolutely fine for my purposes at least. And you do have the different options, but it is again that little bit smaller, unless you're in America. But certainly over here, it's a little bit smaller than you would find in the retail version. The other thing to bear in mind with print and play, and this depends on you and your skills, and how attentive you are to the way your construction is going. But it is entirely possible, here it is, found it at last, it is entirely possible for your lovely print and play game to turn out to be an absolute mess, depending on your skill. And I am not the most skilled print and play person, and so I do sometimes have to repeat myself because I've made a mess. And again, that's something to consider with the print and play. Retail, it is what it is. It's there. It's done for you. Very, very rarely get any issues with print and play. Sorry, with retail. Print and play, of course, you do have the skill factor to consider. There is one of these cards in both versions of the game. Let's find the retail version. So we have the print and play currently on the map at the moment, and then the retail. Interesting to note, when I make my maps and I make my setup charts and all the rest of it, I do put the paper, once it's printed out, I do put it onto a thicker piece of paper or a thicker card. I glue it on, and what's resulted in this instance is that the Playwright card is actually thicker in the print in my homemade copy versus what it is in the retail copy. Not that it's particularly thin or anything. It's still, it's pretty good quality card, but it's worth noting that the thickness of your components, if that's an issue with picking things up and so on, particularly when it comes to the counters, you can have the flexibility, print and play, to make the components as thick as you like. And I do it for the map as well, and also the counters. So the counters then, if I just move the map out of the way, the counters do come in the, just fold them up. They do come in the print and play version. They do come as a piece of paper that you print off, and you can either do that at home, and what I've done with the ones here, which are actually from Gaines Mill, I've just printed them off at home. But as you can imagine, you use up quite a lot of ink, and what you have to do is you have to glue them together, and usually with something in the middle, a piece of card or something, so that you can then cut them out and put sticky back plastic or laminates or something on them. But you have to make them yourself, so otherwise you just can't pick them up without doing that. In the retail version, they're obviously mounted, and the mounting is falling off the sprue. Actually, that's quite a good example. Let's take that. So this is our strategic marker, and they're fairly thickly done. If I find my version of the same counter, have them in this little bag here. The counter is somewhat thinner. My PnP one's on the, if you can tell, even with the added card and things that I've stuck this down on, it's still substantially thinner. And so this retail version will be easier to pick up than the homemade version. But of course that depends on you. You can use anything you like. You can mount these with foam board or whatever, really, rather than just the cardboard like I've done it. The one thing where the counters may differ is, again, in terms of the size, and particularly if you're not in America or the US, or you're not unable to print in the US, is the sizing of the counters can be that little bit smaller, that little bit fiddlier print and play. And also, of course, unless you have the cutting equipment, you can go slightly wonky, as I've done with those two, when it comes to cutting out your counters and so on. And I think the most noticeable thing in my homemade copy of this game is that the map doesn't join together neatly, because I've gone wonky with the scissors. But in the retail version, you don't have that issue. Of course, you have the map. Counters are falling off the spray. The only thing you might have to do if you want to is trim up the sides and clip the corners and all that sort of thing. But that's optional. And of course, if you wish to, you can print and play. You can get them printed off, and yeah, that's obviously Space Firm in the game rather than Winds of Thunder. Is there anything else to look at? I think for me, I like print and play because it's that extra connection. I do go to the trouble of covering my counters in sticky back plastic, but that's partly because the glue that I'm really struggling to find a glue that actually works as well as the glue that they use in retail, and I've never come across a counter yet where the front has fallen off the back in terms of the counters. They don't fall apart, whereas my homemade ones do on a semi-regular basis. And so when you're first starting with the print and play side of things, your product that you make may not resemble what you could actually get retail. And although over the long term and multiple games, the cost of print and play is probably less than what you would spend, retail, by the time you've bought glue and decent cutting equipment and all the rest of it, you may find actually it's not that much cheaper. I think it depends on how much you want to do print and play and how much you choose to make. But when you do make it, there is that extra connection to the game because you spent all that time making it, and it takes quite a bit of time. You know, by the time you've printed everything out and assembled it and everything, you know, it depending on the size of the game. And Winter Thunder's got well over 100 counters. It's quite an undertaking to put it all together and make sure it's all stuck down and everything. But one good thing about Tiny Battles games in terms of print and play is they do tend to not require anything other than maps and counters printed. They don't really need any cubes and so on like some of the other games you can get print and play. Like there are some other games. I get the games from there's a website called War Game Vault, and I order them through there, and some of the games on there do require counters or their cards and all sorts of other things you need to supply as well. But these ones, including Winter Thunder, generally only need to supply a dice. So overall then, I think the retail version of Winter Thunder is it's very nice. The counters are good, the map is good, and it's actually quite a bit bigger than the other Tiny Battle game that I have. It's quite a bit bigger. It's probably double the size nearly. The rule book is good, and I think partly in terms of ease, the rule book is probably slightly better at the retail version because you have that different size paper and it's slightly bigger. But despite all the things that the retail version's got going for it, I do still like my print and play, and I will probably carry on printing and playing games as I have done. So really, which version you go for at the end of my rambling monologue here, it very much depends on how much time you have or are willing to spend making the print and play. I personally think if I didn't enjoy making the game and the physical assembling of all the bits and, you know, putting it all together and you know, regardless of its sort of imperfect finish, if I didn't want to spend that time and enjoy spending that time, I would get the retail version every time. So really, if you are not sure, it's going to be a case of time. How quickly do you want to play the game? If you want to play it quickly and you don't want to spend a lot of time sticking things together and gluing, get the retail version. If you're happy to spend the time gluing things together, maybe making mistakes, go for the print and play. It's just fantastic that you do have the option, the either or option, which is really, certainly again in the UK, makes this type of game far more accessible than it would be if it was exclusively retail. I mean, to the limited availability over here and the general cost as well, by the time you add on customs and all the rest of it. So now, I'll finish there. I hope this has been useful, giving you an idea of not only what's inside the retail version of Winter Thunder, but the differences between buying the retail game and what you'd have to do to make the print and play version. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.